I bought the house back in '94, when wood was still cheaper than regret. It stood alone at the end of a dirt road, the kind that disappeared into the trees without asking for directions. The pines around it leaned in slightly, not menacing, just attentive. The house itself was tired but proud. 2 stories of gray timber, a porch that sighed when you crossed it, windows that always seemed to be waiting for someone to look back. I told everyone it was an investment. A fixer-upper, I'd say, pretending I had tenants lined up, pretending I still had a future worth preparing for. But the truth was quieter. I just needed something that wouldn't move, something I could keep alive by hand. After the fire, everything else had burned away too easily. The job, the house we lived in, the sound of my daughter's voice. This one, I promised myself, would stay. Most mornings followed a ritual that felt holy in its smallness. I'd sweep the porch before the mail arrived, listening to the creak of boards that once carried other footsteps. The broom made a soft hiss across the wood, a sound I'd learned to find comfort in. Inside, the kitchen clock ticked unevenly, like it was catching its breath. I'd leave the radio on low, not for company, but for texture. The static between songs filled the rooms better than silence ever could. I kept everything ready, though no one had lived there for years. The sheets were always clean, folded tight. The curtains were washed every spring and ironed until the fabric felt brittle from care. The refrigerator hummed quietly, even though it was mostly empty. I replaced the light bulbs before they burned out, not because I needed to, but because the house seemed to ask for it. Maintenance is penance, I suppose. Neighbors didn't come by much. The nearest house was half a mile down, and the old woman who lived there said she liked her peace. Still, sometimes I caught her looking at me from her fence, the way people look at a photograph they can't quite place. Once, she asked if I ever heard the music. I told her it was just my radio, but I turned it off that night anyway. The silence that followed felt heavier than sound. There was a time I thought about selling it. A realtor drove up once in a red sedan, smiled too wide, said the market was good for character homes. She stepped inside, took one slow look at the living room, and said the air felt strange, like someone had been smoking in there for years. I told her it was just the old wood absorbing the past. She didn't come back. Still I stayed. I fixed the hinges, sanded the floors, painted over water stains that looked too much like handprints. The work kept my mind quiet. Some nights I'd sit on the porch with a single lamp burning beside me, watching the woods dissolve into black. I'd tell myself the light was for the mailman or for passing cars, but I knew better. I left it on the way I used to when my wife was running late. A beacon, a reminder, a promise that someone was waiting. Every house makes a sound when it breathes. The settling of wood, the soft sigh of air through unseen cracks. This one, though, seemed to exhale differently. Sometimes when I stopped moving, I could hear what sounded like a second rhythm underneath my own. A faint scuff, a shuffle, maybe the whisper of fabric against floorboards. I told myself it was the pipes, or the wind slipping through the attic vents. And maybe it was. But every night before I went to sleep, I checked the rooms. All of them. Not because I was afraid, but because I wanted to make sure everything stayed exactly as it should be. Untouched. Waiting. That's how I convinced myself the world still worked, by keeping this place ready for whoever was coming next. Sometimes, though, when I turned off the light, I caught myself pausing in the doorway, listening to the quiet inside those rooms. It wasn't empty. It never really was. If stories like this find you when you need them, don't disappear. Subscribe to the channel and stay close. I have more truths to share. It started with the mailbox. Every Thursday, I'd walk down the dirt path and check it, even though no one ever wrote to me. Bills went to my P.O. box in town, and I hadn't received a personal letter in years. But one morning in early October, there was an envelope sitting inside. No stamp, no return address, just my name written in neat blue ink. Inside was a folded piece of paper torn from a child's notebook. A simple note. Thank you for the house. We love it here. I stood there longer than I should have, the air cold and still around me. It was easy to laugh it off. Kids playing a prank, I thought. The town's full of them, and the old Whitmore place had always carried stories. Still, the handwriting looked too careful, too earnest. I kept the letter on the kitchen table for a while before tucking it into the drawer beside the old rent receipts I'd written years ago, back when I still pretended people wanted to live here. A week later, I noticed the curtains in the upstairs bedroom had been drawn open. I was sure I'd left them closed. The bedspread looked slightly wrinkled too, as if someone had sat on it. I blamed memory. Middle age does that, makes you misremember the small things. Still, I smoothed the sheets, closed the curtains again, and locked the door behind me, just to settle my mind. That night, I dreamed the house was humming. Not loudly, just a low vibration beneath the floorboards, like someone whispering a word I couldn't quite catch. I woke to the sound of the porch swing moving outside. It creaked softly in the dark, though there was no wind. By morning the swing was still, but a faint print of dust outlined where someone might have sat. The broom leaned against the railing, the same place I always left it, but the bristles were wet, as if it had been used before dawn. I told myself these things happen. Wood shifts, animals wander in, air currents stir the curtains. But a strange calm settled over me, the kind you feel when you realize you've stopped asking if you're alone. On Sunday, I heard footsteps in the hall while shaving. Light, quick, a child's steps. The floor always betrayed movement. Old houses have a rhythm to them. I called out, "Hello?" and listened for the echo. The silence afterward felt rehearsed, like someone holding their breath. Later, I found small things moved. A teacup on the wrong shelf, a chair pulled slightly from the table, a faint ring of condensation on the wood, as though someone had set down a glass of water hours before. I checked the locks twice, then a third time, though I wasn't sure what I was trying to keep out. The next letter came 2 days later, slipped through the mail slot this time. We cleaned the windows. They look much better now. I walked the perimeter of the house. No footprints, no sign of entry, just the hum of cicadas in the trees and the faint scent of lemon cleaner wafting from the open window upstairs. That scent, too fresh, too recent, made me stop. When dusk fell, the house glowed faintly from within. I stood outside and watched the light move across the upstairs room, a warm amber like a lamp being carried from one corner to another. I could almost hear laughter, brief, airy, the way my daughter used to sound when she hid from me behind the curtains. I didn't go inside right away. I just stood there in the yard, watching my own house breathe. When I finally gathered the nerve to enter, everything was exactly as I'd left it. Curtains closed, lamp off, stillness intact. But on the kitchen table beside the empty teacup, someone had left 3 coins stacked neatly in a column. Payment, maybe, or a gesture. The top coin still held the faint warmth of touch. That night, I left the porch light burning again. Not out of fear this time, out of courtesy. If this story touched something inside you, leave a not for me, but for the next person who's looking for a reason to stay. The letters kept coming. Always short, always written on that same torn notebook paper. We fixed the garden fence. The little one found her toy in the attic. The house feels happy now. I didn't tell anyone. There was no one to tell. Besides, the words didn't feel threatening. If anything, they felt domestic, familiar. Sometimes I'd catch myself smiling when I read them, though I couldn't explain why. It was like overhearing a life continuing without me. Then the changes began to multiply. The air inside turned warmer, softer somehow. The old radiator, which hadn't worked since Clinton took office, started to hum again. I woke to the faint clink of dishes in the sink, the sound of water running. Each time I found everything spotless, arranged just the way I would have done it. One evening, while dusting the hallway mirror, I saw something in the glass behind me. Not movement exactly, but a shift in the light, like someone passing between rooms. I turned, expecting the empty corridor, and found only the faint smell of soap and cedar. I began leaving small offerings without admitting that's what they were. A basket of apples on the counter, clean towels folded on the banister, a pot of stew kept warm on the stove. By morning, the food was always gone, the towels used, the air heavy with steam. I told myself it was mice, humidity, imagination. But a part of me, the quiet part that had learned to live in ruins, began to believe otherwise. One night after a long rain, I heard a man's voice coming from upstairs. Calm, steady, speaking to someone I couldn't see. I froze in the kitchen, listening. The words were muffled, but the rhythm was unmistakable. It was the same cadence I used to hear when I read bedtime stories to my daughter. When I finally dared to climb the stairs, the voice had stopped. The air was colder there, thick with the smell of burnt wood. I reached the bedroom door, the same one I used to lock, and found it slightly ajar. Inside, everything was neat, untouched, except for the mirror above the dresser. A single handprint, small and smudged, marked the glass. That night I dreamt I was sitting at the dinner table with them again. My wife, my little girl, laughter echoing off the walls like sunlight in water. But the light flickered, and when it steadied, they were looking at me with something close to pity. My wife reached for my hand and whispered, "You don't have to keep paying the rent." I woke with tears already on my face, the kind that don't come from fear, but from remembering something you've tried too long to forget. The next morning, I found the front door open, though the lock was still turned. On the porch lay a rent envelope, the same kind I used to hand out years ago with my name written where the tenants should be. Inside, instead of money, there was ash, fine, gray, and warm to the touch. That's when I stopped pretending. I began to talk to them, quietly at first, while cleaning or fixing things. I told them about the weather, the leaves turning, the grocery prices in town. And sometimes, when I paused, I heard faint replies. Not words exactly, but small confirmations in the creak of the floor or the slow swing of the door. The house wasn't haunted in the usual way. It was cooperative, responsive, as if we'd built a rhythm between us, me tending to its needs, it pretending not to remember. But late one evening, while sealing a crack in the living room window, I noticed something impossible. My reflection wasn't alone. Behind me, in the dim glass, stood a woman holding a child. They weren't looking at me. They were looking through me, at the room as it used to be, bright, alive, before the fire took it all. The woman smiled faintly, the way my wife used to when she caught me watching her from across the room. Then the reflection blinked, and they were gone. The silence afterward was unbearable. Never empty, but expectant, as though the house itself was waiting for me to finally admit the truth it had been whispering all along. It happened the night the furnace came back on. I was in the basement, checking the pilot light out of habit. It hadn't worked in years, but suddenly it was burning steady, blue and calm, like it had never gone out. The air smelled faintly of pine and smoke, the same scent that had clung to me after the fire, years ago. The house was too quiet. Even the wind outside had stopped. I climbed the stairs slowly, one hand on the rail, and as I reached the living room, I heard it. A low hum, the sound of a song without words. A woman's voice. It came from upstairs. I didn't rush. I walked the way you do towards something you've already accepted, approaching your own memory. Each step creaked the same way it did that night long ago. The night I left a candle burning on the dresser while my daughter slept down the hall. When I reached the bedroom, the door was open. The light inside flickered, not from the lamp, but from the air itself, like a film being projected onto the room. There they were, my wife and my daughter, sitting at the table, the one I'd sold after the fire. She was helping the little one draw something on a sheet of paper. I wanted to speak, to move, to beg forgiveness, but my voice stayed buried in my throat. They didn't look at me. They were calm, serene, alive in the way memories are alive, untouched by time, untouched by consequence. Then the smell of smoke grew stronger. The drawing in my daughter's hand darkened around the edges, curling as if catching flame. My wife turned her head, slowly, her face pale with recognition, not of me as I was, but of what I'd become. "You kept it burning," she said, not accusing, just tired. "You never let it go out." The walls shivered, the air rippled. The sound of fire was everywhere, not roaring, but whispering, like the echo of an old confession. The wallpaper peeled back in strips, revealing the char beneath, the blackened ribs of the house. And then I saw it. The truth I had built everything to avoid. I hadn't been renting the house to ghosts. I had been renting myself to memory. Each repair, each letter, each light left burning was my way of pretending the fire hadn't already finished its work. I fell to my knees as the house exhaled around me, breathing, forgiving. The woman and child stood in the doorway now, watching me with a tenderness that hurt worse than anger. My daughter held out her small hand, ash gathering on her fingers. "We're not the ones who stayed, Dad," she said. "You are." And with that, the room went dark. The hum stopped. The warmth faded into a silence that felt clean, absolute. When I opened my eyes, I was alone. The walls were bare again. No scorch marks, no furniture, only dust and light coming through the cracked window. My hands trembled, but they were empty. The smell of smoke was gone. Downstairs on the kitchen table lay the last letter. My name, written one final time in that careful blue ink. Inside, just one sentence: "You can go now." The paper was warm. The ink still wet. It's been 9 years since that night, though time feels uncertain here. Some mornings it stretches thin, like fog over the field, and other days it folds back on itself, like the sound of my own footsteps returning before I take them. I still live in the house, or maybe I live with it. I haven't decided which is truer. The rooms are quieter now, gentler. The floorboards don't groan so much when I walk. The air feels lighter, too, as if it's forgiven something. I keep the windows open most days, let the pine air drift through, listen to the world go on without asking for my attention. I don't hear the humming anymore. No footsteps, no laughter caught between walls. Sometimes I think I miss it, the illusion of company, the soft choreography of ghosts. But maybe that's how grief survives, by pretending it's still needed. I found the courage, a few months after, to read through all the old letters again. Every one of them still folded neatly, the paper yellowed at the edges. I spread them out across the table and saw the truth I should have recognized from the start. The handwriting was mine. Always had been. The same loops in the D, the same pressure in the ink. I had written to myself, year after year, inventing tenants so I wouldn't have to face what was missing. I had been both landlord and ghost, both keeper and kept. It's strange how the mind builds rooms for the things it can't release. I filled this one with chores and rituals, sweeping, polishing, checking the locks. The busy language of denial. When you repeat something often enough, it becomes prayer. And I prayed, in my own small way, for the house to remember us kindly. Sometimes, when the wind moves right, I still catch a faint smell of lemon polish and burnt wood. It doesn't frighten me anymore. It feels like memory, taking one last breath before it fades. I let it. I've learned that love doesn't disappear when it dies. It just changes its address. The locals still think the place is empty. They say no one's lived here since the fire. Maybe they're right. Maybe what remains of me is more echo than man, a caretaker tending to what used to be real. But the truth feels simpler. I stayed because I needed to finish what I started, to let the fire end. There's a new family living in town now. Real, breathing people. I sometimes see their little boy riding his bike past the gate, slowing down to look at the porch. Wave. He waves back. I thought, once, about renting the house again, but I know better now. This place isn't meant to hold new lives. It's a reliquary, a space where something terrible turned sacred. I've sealed the upstairs bedroom, not out of fear but respect. The door stays closed, painted white, sunlight spilling under it in the mornings like forgiveness. Sometimes, when I pass, I rest my hand on the doorknob, and the metal feels warm. Not hauntingly so, just alive. The world outside has changed. There are cell towers now, gas prices that make people curse at the pumps, and voices that travel farther than they used to. But here, inside these walls, time keeps its own calendar. I still write letters sometimes. Only now I sign them differently, for the ones who left when I couldn't. I bury them under the oak in the backyard. The soil there is dark and patient. It knows things about endings that I'm only beginning to understand. Sometimes, late at night, I sit on the porch with a single lamp burning beside me, the way I always used to. I don't do it for them anymore. I do it for me. To remember the warmth of waiting, the strange holiness of remorse. The forest hums, the house breathes, and the stars feel close enough to listen. A few nights ago, the boy from town stopped his bike at the edge of the yard. He called out, "Mister, how long have you lived there?" I told him, long enough to learn how to leave. He didn't understand, of course. He smiled and rode away, wheels crunching over gravel like fading footsteps. When he was gone, I turned off the lamp. The house went dark, but it wasn't empty. It felt at peace, resting finally, like an old animal allowed to sleep. I think about the fire sometimes, not the flames, but what came after. The silence, the stillness, the shape of absence left behind. I used to think that was the punishment. Now I know it was the beginning, because in that quiet, I learned that ghosts don't linger to torment us. They stay until we're ready to see that we were haunting them all along. And tonight, for the first time in years, I'm ready. I walk through the house one last time, touching the walls, the frames, the small imperfections I once tried so hard to fix. Every mark has softened. Every shadow looks like memory forgiving itself. I open the front door, step onto the porch, and breathe in the scent of pine and rain. Behind me, the light in the hallway flickers once, like a heartbeat, then steadies. I leave it burning. It never followed me home. It was already here. If stories like this find you when you need them, don't disappear. Subscribe to the channel and stay close. I have more truths to share.